off at 6:30, just sharing technology, and then Mary will take it from there, and then I'll get us started on the first agenda item.
Yeah, sounds good. I'll give everybody just another minute and then we'll get started.
I like that picture.
I know.
I forget what the runners are, but I had a shirt with that on it.
I'm reminding you, CFLCA meeting.
I wonder if that takes place, if it's in Italy.
All right, folks, it's 6:30. We'll go ahead and get started. I'm just going to start us off with just a few quick reminders and notes for everyone. One change from last month, we got some feedback that everybody wanted the chat to be brought back, that they wanted to see the questions that were being asked in real time. So we took that into consideration, and you can now see the chat from everyone. We just ask that you remember that everyone can see the chat unless you direct it to a specific individual. And so please be conscious of that. When the presenters are speaking, we will be muting everyone except co-hosts, who will have the ability to unmute themselves. So we asked, if you have any questions that come up, please either direct them into the chat, or you can also use your raise hand feature. And at the end, if there are any raised hands and there's time for questions, we'll unmute you and allow you to ask your question. And then I just want to draw your attention to the fact that we do have a very full agenda. And there's more that we want to discuss, and we have time. So if we don't get to all the questions, just it's for that reason alone. And with that, turning it over to Colleen.
Thank you very much, Keith. And Mary will be fielding the questions. And if you have joined and didn't hear her, please put your name and your neighborhood in the chat box, or otherwise a way to reach you if you are a guest. So welcome and thank you all for joining tonight. We are honored to be joined by amazing, significant leaders in our community to speak on really important topics. On racial equity, on the reopen phase 2 and any other topic that he wishes to speak on, we have the Honorable Vice Mayor Stephen Glassman. On hurricane preparedness in the midst of a pandemic, we are honored to have Fire Chief Rhoda May Kerr. On the status of business recovery, thrilled to have the Greater Fort Lauderdale Chamber President and CEO Dan Lindblade. And though we do not have him listed on the agenda, also delighted that Dr. JJ Rader is here to address health questions. And in our normal fashion, as we have for the last several months, to wrap things up, we will hear from the well-informed and reasoned voice of our city manager, Chris Lagerbloom. I want to thank Senior Management Fellow Keith Farrell from the city, and First Vice President Marion Peliquin for helping to facilitate this meeting. And lastly, I would like to directly thank the Council Board of Directors and our neighborhood leaders for being here tonight and for their civic and community leadership. So, first topic, the most challenging one, racial equity, law enforcement accountability. Before we introduce our really terrific, wonderful speakers, Dr. Salters and Easton Harrison, we're going to show two short videos. There's a short 3-minute CNN video heeding the words of Martin Luther King from 1967, and a 50-second video featuring a 12-year-old gospel singer from Jacksonville speaking his truth. And just a brief backdrop on this, why the council is talking about this. The world is in turmoil over the lethal injustice to George Floyd, but it is not just one Black man, and it is not just injustice in law enforcement at issue. This is an unhealed wound in the fabric of America that is not just not healed, but is being reopened. Black people are and always have been treated unfairly. It is not just now, it is always. The current civil unrest is also deeply connected to the racial disparities that are tied to the coronavirus. We have seen significant inequity in positive cases and death rates. It is our collective duty, and frankly, I mean this mostly for white people, to amplify narratives that help open our eyes, point to justice, and drive equity and equality in this country once and for all. So tonight is a starting point. It is beginning the conversation about how we can do more, have uncomfortable conversations, expand our hearts, and lead with love. With that, Keith, I'm gonna hand it back to you to show the videos. The promo video first, okay.
For the last look, I wanted to address a question that many people have asked me one way or another, especially people who live outside the United States. The question is simple. Why is it that blacks seem to have such difficulty moving ahead in America? Don't other ethnic groups also face discrimination? Don't they also have to deal with poverty and exclusion? This came to mind recently when I watched a short clip of Martin Luther King being asked that very question during a television interview in 1967. In 2 minutes, he brilliantly, eloquently answered the question. He explained that blacks are unique in being the only ethnic group that was brought to America involuntarily in chains. They labored as slaves until finally in 1865 they were freed. But even then, while a massive number of Europeans were coming into the country and receiving land in the Midwest and West, African American slaves, despite having worked for 250 years in America without ever being paid, received little to help them get on their feet. I would add to this the willful destruction of the black family through much of American history. Because slaves were not treated as human beings but property, the law did not recognize their marriages nor even their rights over their children. Families were routinely and forcibly broken up. After 250 years of slavery came 100 years of state-sponsored discrimination, and then civil rights. But soon began what Michelle Alexander has called the new Jim Crow, a system of policing and mass incarceration that has made it so that a black man in America has a 1 in 4 chance of being incarcerated in his lifetime. This is according to the Sentencing Project estimates. Martin Luther King also put an emphasis on the psychological damage that was done. To maintain slavery and segregation, there had to be an ideology of white supremacy, one that left lasting effects on both blacks and whites. Here is King, summing up his points.
Emancipation for the Negro was really freedom to hunger. It was freedom to the winds and rains of heaven. It was freedom without food to eat or land to cultivate, and therefore it was freedom and famine at the same time. And when white Americans tell the Negro to lift himself by his own bootstraps, they don't look over the legacy of slavery and segregation. We ought to do all we can and seek to lift ourselves by our own bootstraps. But it's a cruel jest to say to a boot that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps. And many Negroes, thousands and millions, have been left bootless as a result of all of these years of oppression and as a result of a society that deliberately made his color a stigma and something worthless and degrading.
And that is why the situation for blacks in America is different.
We'll go to the next video.
Sorry, yeah, it looks like I'm not getting the video here for this one.
I will. And can you mute everybody, but mute
Oh, but when I look around and I see what's being done to mankind, every day I'm being hunted as prey. My people don't want no trouble. We've had enough struggle. I just wanna live. God protect me. I just wanna live. I just wanna live.
Okay, so you can take back the screen, Keith, and put up Wayne's slides if you don't mind.
No. Wait.
Or do you want me to do that? Okay, great. All right, so we have a lot to unpack here and not a lot of time. So what we're going to do next is there are 2 slides from Wayne Boulier from Broward College. He is the Associate Dean for the Institute of Public Safety. So that is the local state college department that teaches law enforcement officers going through training. And I think we'll let Dr. Salters reference a lot of what's on these slides, and we lost it. Keith, I don't know if you can put it back up.
Did I have it right? Were those the right? I don't know if I have the slides. Okay.
But there's been significant law enforcement response to the George Floyd murder. I think the larger questions are, in response to excessive use of force, there seems to be a lot of excessive use of force. That is an open question. Beyond law enforcement and that response, I think the larger question about what can we do as a community in response to not just this current injustice, but in the wake of the overriding inequity. So with that, Dr. Salters, do you mind if I turn it over to you to talk about these 2 letters and then the manual by which Broward College is doing their training by, and then you and me can talk. And I really haven't adequately introduced both of you, so let me just do this now. Dr. Salters is a major with Fort Lauderdale Police. He is an amazing community activist and leader. I don't have his bio in front of me. I just know that he's one of the most informed and reasoned and collective voice on not just this topic, but leadership in general. He also sits on several boards, and he is leading a very important youth initiative called 1,000, you can talk about 1,000 Men of Tomorrow, I think it is.
I can give you that, no problem.
Easton Harrison is amazing young activist. He works with Children's Services Council. I believe he works with Broward College as well, if I'm not mistaken, but leads civic and youth engagement for the Broward Youth Alliance and other groups. So going to hand it over to Dr. Salters to talk through these slides, and then we're going to put up some questions for you guys to address. And I would invite and welcome any of our Black neighborhood leaders to please speak up and share your voice and speak your truth as well. Thank you. Over to you, Dr. Salters.
All righty. Good evening, everyone. How's everybody doing?
Good, good.
All righty. Great. I'm glad to be here. And Colleen, I appreciate that intro. And just so y'all can kind of understand my reference, in case you haven't decided, I was born a little Black boy. Then I was a Black young man. Now I'm a Black grown man. And notice all of those things happened before law enforcement. So my lens that I'll be speaking to you from will be as a Black male, be speaking as a law enforcement executive. I've been with Fort Lauderdale over 27 years. Many of you all I've worked with and met out there in the community. I've also completed my master's as public administration. So I'm able to really discuss policy issues and those type of things that are happening within our communities. And I did earn my doctorate in adult education, human resource development. So if we're talking about it from a human resource area, I'm able to also discuss those. And it's kind of interesting when you talk about people's lenses, because when I grew up in largely white, middle-class America, and I was not in a majority Black environment until I attended Florida A&M University. So I'm one of those where you look at it like, okay, this is where I grew up. And like Colleen mentioned with Wayne Bouye out at Broward College, he has an interesting perspective because he's the exact opposite of the way I grew up. He is a white male who grew up in a largely white Black neighborhood down in South Florida. I think he was over in Dania. So his lens is a little bit different. So you'll be able to see that in his leadership style and the things that he's bringing and instilling in the individuals out of the police academy. He and I have known each other for a while. So when we're talking about these letters that the Broward County Chiefs of Police wrote and the Florida Police Chiefs Association, we have to understand that when something this large comes up, the police executives will issue statements. Well, I should say should issue statements. And these statements, those that came out to where they are condemning the illegal acts and then condemning excessive force. And now when we're talking about that, what does it actually mean? How does it go? And what does it deal with us systemically? And when I was looking at our audience here, some of us can go back to the riots and civil rights. We can run right up through it, and you can kind of visualize those images that you had. You had the dogs, you had the fire hoses, and you had the different things in there, show of force. And then also when you were growing up, my father grew up in the South, North Florida to be specific, Chattahoochee, Florida. And when he was growing up, he would grow up and they'd be like, oh, okay, if they didn't see Mr. Williams for a couple of days, it was one of those kind of understood things that, well, the sheriff got him, and you might find out about it later or you might not, and they had no voice, so they had no one to question. So when I was brought up, I know many of us on here, your parents may have told you different things when you were growing up, and we'd always have that talk when the police stop you, do this, do that, and so on and so forth. Don't run in the stores, always get receipts, and don't eat anything till you paid for it in the grocery stores. And it wasn't until I was much older till I started deconstructing that and what it actually meant when things started happening to me, getting stopped in stores, driving home from Tallahassee. I was living in Louisiana, and I got stopped by the police there. And I had my driver's license. He said I was speeding. He wanted to keep my driver's license, and I was like, can I have my driver's license back? Because we're accustomed to the question, license, insurance, and registration. And the gentleman took the license, and he got the information, issued the ticket. I asked for my license back, and he spit out his chart tobacco and said, well, boy, you can have your license back and stay with me the night, or you can go on home without the license. Needless to say, I do not have those licenses. And when things begin to happen as we go, there are a lot of different little things that happen in our lives that we kind of decompress and deconstruct on different ways. And we talk about it in law enforcement. My background is business administration, came out of school in business, and then I ended up in law enforcement. And when we're talking about what's happening here, you look at your training in law enforcement, you look at how things have happened in law enforcement, you look at this particular issue. And many of us that are on this call here, we have heard of different things with police officers using excessive force. We have seen different things, and many times as a police executive, I'm sitting there, and if there are things that go wrong or happen to people in the community, I'm always asking individuals to contact me, reach out to me, let me know, because as an executive, if you don't let me know those issues, I can't address them. But the problem is some communities look at it and they will send the chief, the city manager, Colleen, me, notes, and they will get their issues addressed, whereas other communities are so accustomed to not being heard, not having a voice, it just becomes the normal everyday thing. So they don't even let us know from an executive standpoint that things have occurred. And so things continue to go. And when you look at it in law enforcement, if you all remember, long before the racial profiling came out, Blacks and brown individuals, the same police officers, were using excessive force, and they were planting drugs on them and stopping them just because they were Black. Everybody called it a myth or didn't really give it credence until 1999, when the New Jersey State Trooper, he was asked during trial, did you stop these individuals just because they were Black? And he said yes. And that was 1999 that the term racial profiling was coined. So as we talk this evening, I'm going to be talking about some of those things, and it's so much that's going on. I'm going to be listening for your questions, listening for you to put things in, because what I want to do is, I was speaking with Colleen, and as she wants us to do, these are next steps. And so part of our next step is, one, understanding where we are, understanding the history from both sides, and then being able to take it forward into our next step to improve our community. Easton, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and give a bit?
Yeah, sure. Dr. Salters, thank you for all that you shared. Hello, everyone. Good evening. My name is Easton Harrison. I am a community organizer and community advocate. As Colleen mentioned, I work as a community outreach consultant, currently doing a few projects with Children's Services Council. I also chair the Diversity and Equity Committee of Broward County Public Schools. And the Diversity and Equity Committee is over looking at disparities within the district, within the school district. And we come up with recommendations and policy advisory recommendations as to how they could possibly fix some of these and remedy some of these issues. So my start in community organizing wasn't about politics. It wasn't about trying to be in a popularity contest. It was because of exactly what we're here to talk about today. I was always very observant of the world around me, and I knew that there was something going on, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it. It's kind of like you can smell the smoke, but can't quite see the fire. And ever since, 15 years old, I've kind of been on a quest through reading books, watching documentaries, asking questions to see how exactly can I find this fire. And it wasn't until later on in my organizing career, I guess you could call it, it wasn't until then when I realized that, this fire that I'm looking for is really the systemic structure of this country. And when that hit me, it was a huge epiphany moment for me. I have stories myself of growing up where I've had interactions with law enforcement that made me question and scratch my head, like, why would they do something like that? Just a quick story, at the age of 14, I was put in handcuffs for the first time because I was mistaken for someone who robbed a house in my neighborhood. And I grew up in a neighborhood where people often walk. I was walking to the bus stop, and they said that, they're looking for a suspect, and they decided to just detain me, handcuff me in front of everybody. People knew me in the neighborhood as somebody who doesn't get in trouble. So just the idea of going through that and not knowing what's going on, nobody explaining anything to you, going to a center, being held in like a cage type of thing. And while I'm inside of this holding cell, I hear over the officer's walkie-talkie, and I'll never forget his name. At the time, his name was Dave. And this guy comes over the officer's walkie-talkie, and before he even got to that point, the officer turns around, he looks at me, he's like, listen, kid, I can tell you're a good guy. I could tell you didn't do it. We do this all the time. I can tell you aren't a person. We're just gonna ask you a few questions, whatever, and you'll be out of here. So I'm like, okay, whatever. I hear his walkie-talkie goes off, and this person named Dave comes on the walkie-talkie, and he says, yeah, we just got a suspect in custody. He was walking around looking suspicious, jumbling with his words. I'm pretty sure we got somebody. We're going to be holding on to him. And he turns down his walkie-talkie, so I couldn't really hear. So that was a very eye-opening experience for me, just by having that be my first relationship with police officers. And if it wasn't for me being a community organizer, I would have had that same mentality. There's too many people who look like me, who are young men, who their first encounter with law enforcement is a negative experience like that. And, just going through that negative experience, I could tell you the passion that I had. Everybody who was in a law enforcement suit, I felt like could have been this Dave. Who is this Dave person? You know what I'm saying? So that was a huge eye-opening experience for me. Growing up, my mom did give me the talk. She always told me, you already have 3 strikes against you. You're black, you're a man, and you don't come from money. So you already have 3 strikes against you. And this didn't make me feel like less of a person. She always told me from the perspective of, I'm putting you out there in the world and you have to survive, because your chances of surviving isn't like the next person who doesn't look like you. So I'm excited to get into this conversation today. Again, Colleen, thank you for not only having this conversation, but centering Black voices to speak up about their experiences with this conversation. I think that means a lot. So thank you all for having me.
Thank you both very much. Really incredible, remarkable people. Thank you for your authentic, lived experience, right? We can't possibly relate to that daily stress of going out of the house every single day, all of your life. So Keith, would you mind putting up the list of questions. I think what I'm looking for, and I hope all of us are some practical guidance next steps in terms of what can we do, what should we be doing, and other suggestions from our neighborhoods. Please ask your questions and offer your suggestions in the chat box, your questions and suggestions. But I think we've talked about the first question, what is the talk, right? Every set of Black parents I know has the talk with their kids. And I had a disturbing conversation with the neighbor yesterday that I think we've kind of addressed as well. But the neighbor said to me, look, 4 cops have been arrested for the George Floyd murder. Haven't we fixed the problem? Aren't we done with this, right? So it's understanding even that mindset that we're not nearly done. What does white and woke mean? And how can we be more woke? Maybe we'll start with that question, and I'll turn it back to you guys to kind of explain to us how we go about being more woke and showing our solidarity.
Cool.
So do you want us to not address those first 2 because we skimmed over them? We can go whichever you would like.
I think if there is a further explanation required concisely for those first 2, listen, we need 2 days of training on this, honestly. So I leave it to you. You allocate, we probably have about 5 minutes, 10 minutes max left. So you allocate how you want. I think I would hope that we would leave with some, even if it's just, continue the conversation kind of suggestions and recommendations. That would be very helpful.
Okay, with that in mind, what I'll do as I speak is I would like to give us some nuggets that we can kind of think about and kind of can take them forward. And if you want to continue the conversations any deeper, I know that I'm available. Everybody on here should be available. But I want to give us some nuggets because sometimes if we go too deep in one, we could miss some that the others had over there. So when you talk about the talk, a lot of times the talk is basically saying what we have to do as Blacks, minorities, or marginalized individuals that others can't do. One of the things that you always think about, one of the ones that used to really get me was don't touch anything in the store unless you are buying it. Because later they tell you, see, they would think people would think you were stealing it. And it used to be funny to me or strange when I go to the grocery store with my white friends and they would go over there by the grapes and they would taste the grapes. I would literally start shivering because my mom would have knocked me out for eating food in the store because they would have accused us of stealing. And I was like, well, you got to taste it to make sure it's well. So you did that. Even where some people may go in there and be hungry, they get a bag of chips and they eat the chips and then take them to the register and pay. That wasn't something we did because you'd be accused of stealing. Then the other one is maybe people have heard the phrase where as a minority, you have to be 3 times as good to get the same opportunities. So you start looking at it and you look within your organizations many times, you'll see that the minorities are always seeking more education, this, and not that others don't, but we know that we have to have it as a basic requisite to get the same opportunities. And I've tested it in numerous organizations that I have been a part in, and it holds true. And that's just to get an opportunity, not to get ahead. And then when they say the 4 cops have been arrested for the murder, haven't we fixed the problem? Well, that depends on how you define the problem. If the problem is holding those individuals accountable for that one particular singular incident, yes. But if the problem is defined as what is in people's minds, what's in their heart, and the systemic issues, then no, as has been explained by your naval officer who had gone Facebook Live accidentally for 30 minutes and he apologized and stated that he should not have stated those certain things. It's not the fact that you stated it, it's the fact that you're acting on it and you really feel the way that he felt. So he's really more upset that others heard the way that he felt. But then as Easton can get into, and he deals with the systemic issues, and I deal with them also, is that if you have a high-ranking naval individual that got caught stating that on Facebook Live, how many times has he had that conversation with others, or how many times has his managerial decisions been made based on those things that he stated? Then white and woke is what a friend of mine, Shabera, She has that, and you could even Google white and woke to get into exactly what it means to her. She has a tremendous history. Her mother is Jewish, her father is white, and they were married long years ago, and it created some issues, and her father was big in the civil rights era. So now she is a biracial child, but she has the white and woke, and that's dealing with individuals that are white, not Black, but are aware of the systemic issues and the problems that come along. Easton, I'll let you take some of those other bullets to give some nuggets, if you will, sir.
Most definitely. Thank you. Thank you. So I want to tackle the part with the talk real quick. So I know a lot of times we hear about some of the toughest conversations to have is, you know, talk about politics and religion. And I think what we want to do is probably add a race to that third point. And also, the more difficult or awkward conversations may seem, sometimes those are the most healthy conversations we can have. Now, growing up, you know, sometimes getting to talk, like Dr. Salter said, little things like that. You know, if you touch something, you know, don't buy it. No, don't touch it unless you're buying it. These are things that we've heard time and time again. But the first few times you get to talk, when your parents sit you down and they tell you, listen, you are a Black person, and, you know, this is the world you live in. A lot of times that discussion can be just as taboo, if not more, than the first time talking to your child about, you know, having sexual relations. Like, it can be a taboo conversation, and it's very big in the Black community. So the talk is very much a cultural thing that's taking place a lot. The second part, 4 cops have been arrested for the George Floyd case. Here's the reason why that doesn't solve much, because this is just something that highlights why we should take a closer look at racism and systemic racism in this country. I personally feel like racism has different facets. There are different rooms of racism. Today we're talking about law enforcement, but I believe you know, a lot of what we're seeing being done to Black people with law enforcement is being done in, you know, with healthcare, is being done in the educational system, is being done with athletics. So racism is a systemic thing. And what I like about the George Floyd thing that's coming out of it is that this is the first time on this scale I've seen something happen where people are actually starting to take note and starting to ask tough questions, like, how do we really tackle racism on a whole level, on a whole scale? So just arresting individuals is not enough. We have to look at what is the police culture like within these police institutions. You know, just like how you have a football team and there's locker talk, and, you know, different players will talk about the best strategies they use to block other people. These are the same conversations police are having, you know, because they're humans. So police are going to have conversations, and we don't know what the policing culture is like behind the scenes. We don't know if we have sergeants that are encouraging this type of behavior. Also, we don't have a very good accountability system in place. So what are the systemic changes we can do to shift the culture of policing? I think that's how we really move the needle towards justice. What type of systemic changes can we make? What type of policy changes can we make? No more rear naked chokeholds, no more knees in the neck, no more racially profiling people. There was something I heard from an individual, I don't know if it's true or not, but somebody was like, back in the day, if a police officer was to shoot their gun, anytime you unloaded your firearm, you had to, you know, turn it in and create a written report as to why you did it. You had to justify it before you would get your gun back, whether you did it in the right name or not. Things like that. You know, what can we change in the culture of policing in a systemic way? I think is what's most important than just arresting 4 individuals. White and woke,
Easton,
sure, go ahead.
If I may. When we're having this conversation, I will just jump in here, because some of the things that you mentioned, like, you can't find in anybody's police repertoire where they say, if a person does this, choke them and then put your knee on their neck. That doesn't exist. When you fire your firearm, you still have to turn that in. There's still some issues going on with that.
Got you.
So it's kind of, and these are things where you have to have these open dialogues, because a lot of people will go with what they see, hear, and believe, and that isn't the truth. Because now what happens is, when you're looking at it in terms of a response to resistance, what some call it a use of force, is that the only time that I can do anything, like right now you say a chokehold, outlaw the chokehold. Well, do we outlaw the chokehold because we see what's happened here, or what's happened in departments is, if I use things that can create or cause death, I must be at that death standpoint. So theoretically, if I feel as though I am in fear for my life and I go to choke Easton, if I can articulate that, then okay, was it a chokehold I was doing, or was I in fear for my life and using a deadly technique?
Gotcha.
So it's a lot different than what people are saying, because once I get to the level of using deadly force, it doesn't describe how I have to use that deadly force.
Right.
You see,
right.
Just as long as I can use the deadly force. And that's why in this particular incident, that's why you see so many law enforcement officers that are really against this, because we know that if you're going to put your knee on somebody's neck, you better be in danger. Your life better be in danger. And many of us have not seen that in the videos that have been shown to us.
Correct. And, you know, time and time again, there's another thing is that I think, you know, what happened with George Floyd was just a culmination of anger from all of the videos people have been seeing on Facebook, on Instagram, being bombarded with these images. And, you know, people were just saying, you know, we've had enough. And this is something that happened on a global scale, which I think ties into the idea that this is a systemic thing. So, you know, so this is deep. I know we're limited on time, but just to go over white and woke, I think Dr. Salters did a good job with that. Go ahead, Doctor. It sounds like you got something you wanted to say.
What I'm doing is, what I'm trying to do is be cognizant of everybody's time, because I know that I'm seeing some questions that are popping up here in the chat, and I didn't know how, Colleen, we've talked about some of the bullets. Colleen, would you like for us to begin answering some of these questions that are in the chat? I see some have posted them to everybody. Some have sent some directly to me, but wanting them to be posted. How do you want us to address the questions?
Okay, so we have a number of questions. I think this is the challenge. We're not going to get to answers tonight, right? I think that what we're talking about is beginning a narrative, right?
Okay.
My thought would be to look at these questions and address them if you can quickly, but takeaways for tonight, I'll summarize after you if you would like, but I default to you, Dr. Salters, or defer to you in terms of responding. And Chief Kerr, I certainly hope we have time for you. That is wonderful. She's offering up her time to allow for us to have an extended conversation, but yeah.
So Dr. Salters, you want to tackle a question or two, and I probably take another point off the list?
Sounds good, man. I love working with you. Okay, one of the things when they say what specific changes, I see William asked that, what specific changes do I recommend to restore trust? One of them is kind of like tonight. While we're dealing with race issues and this type of stuff, the main thing is to build connections. If you start looking at law enforcement like you do a business deal or anything like that, you got to build relationships, and that will help us. Once you build those relationships, you can begin to understand, like I just mentioned on the chokehold and the other things. I also worked in internal affairs, and if there are good things and or bad things that are happening in the community, you need to let your law enforcement executives know. That's where things begin to happen. We can post some of the other ones that are coming through. Then the other one is, why has a Fort Lauderdale police officer who pushed the kneeling female processor head down toward the ground last Sunday not been charged with assault? One, because when you look at the process and you look at how things are done, everything is going now and the investigation is going. That's normal police procedure. So the investigation is going on. And because it's an ongoing investigation, I've probably said all I can say about that one. What changes is FLPD demanding of the police on discriminatory policies. We have a policy dealing with racial profiling and that type thing, but what you'll notice, if you were to Google me and look at my doggone dissertation, it can take you a little bit further into that issue of racial profiling. But what you'll notice about racial profiling is there is no singular definition of racial profiling. There also is no singular methodology for taking racial profiling statistics. And also, if you look at race, race is a social construct. So it just depends on which part of the world you're in. And if you go to Canada, you'll see that there are visible racial minorities, and that is a protected class. So we can get there. And go ahead, Easton, take some bullets.
Yeah, sure. So there's a couple bullets that stuck out to me, but I just want to say Dr. Salters is one of the best, if not the best person to come and talk on this subject. And that kind of ties into what hiring more Blacks in law enforcement can do. I know it gives that perspective. I remember one time, even Dr. Salters mentioned a story about people wanted to take, some deputies wanted to take horses down Sistrunk. And he was like, it's not a good idea. And they still did it. And then people were complaining, but you know, you need a Black officer to give that perspective and say, listen, I don't think that's a good idea. I don't think you know what you're doing. So stuff like that. Go ahead, sir. You want to touch on that?
And I guess it comes into context because the history of the mounted unit, and they work for me right now. The history of that mounted unit, a few years back during the budget crunch, we were getting ready to get rid of our mounted police, but it was the community that came up with the money and the funding that allowed us to keep our mounted unit. But now when you're having civil unrest or protests and this type thing, it means something different east of Federal Highway when the horses comes or when the horses ride into the northwest section, because that brings back the rides of the KKK, the burning crosses, the torches, and all of that type stuff. So you must understand people's context when they see horses. Same thing when you deal with dogs. Over in certain neighborhoods, everybody loves the dogs and they're kissing the dogs. Other neighborhoods, you bring a German Shepherd. I don't want to play with your German Shepherd. Why? Look back at the historical context and how they were used. Right. So when we deal with these, you mean well, but be careful. Right. You know, it's kind of like what they say also, if you're really trying to deal with a Black family and you're going over to Thanksgiving dinner, do you take a sweet potato pie or a pumpkin pie?
Right. Yep.
You take a sweet potato.
Right. So I just wanted to touch on one point I really wanted to tackle. Should Black history be taught in schools? The answer is yes, but it's definitely more than just a simple yes. When we talk about context, I personally believe that for Black children, if they get to see the right images, that could either motivate them or make them think in an adverse way to their benefit. And what I mean by that is the average narrative of Black history starts from slavery. It starts with African American history, where there's not nothing wrong with it. I think we should learn that, but I think it serves us well to talk about Black history in a holistic sense and talk about some of the civilizations that took place in Africa, some of those Black African indigenous civilizations. And the reason why is because I remember being in school, which you could probably look at me and know that wasn't too long ago. But I remember being in high school that, you know, you learned about the Ming Dynasty, you learned about, you know, all these other civilizations. And then when we got to Black people, the furthest we got back was slavery. All right. So that does a lot for the individual. And me personally, when I started to learn about African history, how people were before they were enslaved, did a lot for me with my self-esteem, did a lot for me with my confidence. I want to also recognize Mayor Matthew Pygott down in the city of Opelika. He's a mayor now. He has the same story as me. He was doing bad in school, and then he started reading some books. You know, I started reading some books, and that's what inspired me, books I wasn't necessarily getting in school. So what we're doing in the discussions we've had with the Broward County Public Schools District, with the Diversity and Equity Committee, is just that. How do we talk about Black history before slavery? And then we start looking at books like books written by Shanketa Diop. We looked at
Jawanza Kunjuku.
Ivan Van Sertima, correct him too. Ivan Van Sertima, they came before Columbus. So actually talking about, there were Black people on this continent before we were enslaved. And a lot of people will hear these things and they say, can we actually teach that in school? Can we, is that appropriate? And the answer is a resounding yes. Of course it is. Because we talk about everything else. And I think the biggest issue with this is that our school curriculum is being crafted by majority white people, which going back to that perspective and having context, how can you get a true holistic education if that's the case? So I think that's a very important thing, that we look at Black history in its holistic context before slavery.
And also when we're looking at history, a lot of individuals I've worked with on the academic level, and some of them we've gotten into some very deep intellectual studies, we're talking about it. But one article I would like for you all to look at, it's called Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack, and that's by Peggy McIntosh. And that's when she talks about white privilege and what does it actually mean? Because the construct of race is all based on not being white. So when you look at it, when you are the measure, you really don't have to define whiteness, and it's other little things that come out. She lays out a good article there that really kind of lays in there some different things to gives us a place to discuss things. And also with the Broward County School Board last year, they rented out a theater and they showed the movie, The Hate You Give. And that was a tremendous movie that talked about all angles. Everybody that's here, any angle you may have was covered in the movie, The Hate You Give. It's probably on Netflix now. And that movie, it had Tupac Shakur, and I'd always heard of Thug Life, and I looked at it literally as people my age would do it, thinking about they want to be a thug and they're celebrating thug. But Thug Life actually stands for The Hate You Give Little Infants F's Everybody. And it walks through that in the movie. It starts with the talk where a guy that was a drug kingpin was showing his kids how to stay out of trouble because he turned over his life. And it walks through every situation that you can possibly think of. People in the inner city trying to get their kids to better schools. It talked about trying to fit in as a Black individual in the white environment. It talked about the white young man that dated the Black young lady. Talked about the Black guy that was the cop. Everything that you can think about was covered in that movie. And I think that would be one, if we wanted to watch it and discuss it, it will deal with a lot of issues. So those two things, Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack and the movie The Hate You Give, I think will take our conversation a lot further.
That's wonderful recommendations. I think we are going to need to wrap this up. Unfortunately, we are not going to get through all the questions. Those two references in terms of reading, I think other books are recommended and out there that are significant and helpful. This is too big a conversation to do in this amount of time. I went through a 2-day racial equity training course. It was fabulous. And it was 2 days and I left frustrated that we didn't have answers and we weren't going to solve problems right away. And I realized that was my lived experience and shame on me. But in terms of next steps for us, is there, for both of you guys, can you wrap up, continuing these conversations, getting involved, participating in anything we can do to help Fort Lauderdale PD or BSO be more accountable, is a strong word, but are there other recommendations you have? And before we do that, I do want to give the floor to Christina to make her, just give her question or make her statement. And for the rest of you, for the rest of these questions that you are asking, if Dr. Salters and Easton are willing, we will, with their help, answer those questions and send them to you after this meeting concludes. So with that, Christina, and then Dr. Salters and Easton, you guys get the last word.
Okay, so I want to introduce myself. My name is Christina Curry, and I am the current chair of the Fort Lauderdale Citizen Police Review Board. I'm in my 5th term here. So one of the things that I'm noticing is some of the people in the question box are asking about third-party entities providing oversight. Well, in the city of Fort Lauderdale, we have a board, and everybody who's sitting in this meeting and who's asking comments and who's making suggestions about policy, please come to the meeting and share your feedback, because normally I'm the only one who's doing these types of things. Dr. Salters, I would urge you to please consider using the Citizens Police Review Board as an arm in what you're trying to do here, because you have a captive audience of people who've said they want to volunteer and our efforts are not being used. And I just want to close by saying that I am so glad to get to hear you speak today, Dr. Salters. And since everything has been happening nationwide and in our community, and we've been hearing from other people in the Fort Lauderdale Police Department, I've been asking myself and the people close to me, why haven't we heard from you? I want you to know that for me, you're the voice of comfort, and you're the person who should be speaking on this, with all due respect to everybody else. So I think whatever we can do to encourage whoever it is that's deciding to have you out there and sharing your feedback, I think you're the type of person that people want to hear from. I know that that is the case for me. So thank you for being willing to do this tonight. And please consider me a resource in any way that I can. Thank you.
I appreciate it. And hopefully you see that I am a resource. And as I'm speaking tonight, I'm speaking from my Dr. Gregory Salters hat, as opposed to my Major Salters hat. I'm in my own stuff. I'm after hours. So, So what I say is true, but I don't want to say it was Fort Lauderdale Police Department that's speaking to you, but I cannot deny that I am a major there. I have worked in internal affairs. I do understand the value of the Citizens Review Board, and I do understand that many people are unaware that the Citizens Review Board is there and how much impact they can have on what actually happens with the officers in Fort Lauderdale. So thanks a lot, and we can definitely connect. I did put my cell phone number on there. Please give me a call. We'd love to talk.
And I guess to touch on Colleen, just to wrap up, as to what some next steps look like and what can be done, I think true white solidarity is about being fully involved and vested in the issues that's going on. I made a post on Facebook the other day where I was saying that, just posting on social media isn't enough. White people have a lot of work to do. And I posted that because I really do feel like white people can play a very integral role in maybe not solving the issue 100%, but definitely talking to other white people and getting them to understand a little bit about what racism is and what it looks like once they've understand it. I think the 2-day racial equity training you referred to, Colleen, is amazing. I think that's an amazing place to start. I think enough is covered to get people to kind of understand what racism is on a systemic level, because they talk about the groundwater, then the lake water, why the fish are dying, and so on and so forth. So it's good to wrap your mind around that type of concept. But I really think that white people in solidarity have to do a lot more, as a group. You have to turn inward, go to your workplace and say, what does your leadership board looks like? Are we putting people of color in a pipeline for upward mobility? If there's homeowners associations that have a lot of, white people visibly, you can ask them, what are you doing to actually, talk about the issues that's going on, or what are we doing to play our role in making sure that Black lives do matter? There's a lot of talk going on right now around, whether or not we should defund the police or get rid of the police. I won't really speak on that, but what I will say is that I think that what we have to look at is where we are putting our resources. And I will say that if we, and maybe I could talk to you some more after this, Dr. Salters, but if we run the tapes and see how many of these phone calls are being made in 911 about domestic violence, about somebody who seems to be going through mental health issues, about all of these things that doesn't, and then you send an officer out there on scene, could we be reallocating some of those funds to the actual services that do those types of things? And I think that's a good place to start the conversation and look at. I don't know what that looks like for Broward County, but I do know it's worth looking at to see if all of the funds that we're giving to, police institutions, and how are those funds being used in terms of, and then again, it's a big conversation because police do different things. They don't just police with a gun and go out there. But Dr. Salters, please. Okay, and I know we're running on time. One of the things I want to take away the nuggets for everyone to kind of understand where we are. When we're talking about the inclusion of Blacks, we aren't talking about Blacks that are not qualified, because that's where I think we get confused and people are looking at hiring unqualified individuals. That isn't it. We're just saying that if they are qualified, many times they are qualified, and I invite people to, you can Google me, you can see that the things that we talk about. And the things also is that when you look on YouTube and you'll see some of these differences on how police address Blacks that are doing things and how they address whites. So physically, the ones that you see are a lot different. Also, when you had them, think about it, if it would have been a mob of Black individuals that had their guns and were going out there, going to City Hall and arguing and protesting their rights about being the stay-at-home orders, do you really believe they would have been able to leave there the same way that they came? That's a different group of individuals. So when we're looking at, we're just looking at, with all things being equal, are the same individuals being treated equally? Being Black or being white is what's looked upon. I think that some people try to devalue the conversation saying, I'm saying hire unqualified individuals because they are Black. Personally, I have a problem with that when somebody says, hire me, I'm Black. Hire me, I'm another marginalized individual. Are you qualified for the position? Now, if you are, we can have some more conversations. So I enjoy having this conversation. I just didn't want us to think that it's one of these woe is me things. I'm Black, oh, help me out. No, right. That's not what we're saying. All right. Thank you, Colleen.
No, thank you. You both are amazing. we have a long way to go, but it's our duty. And we are going to be part of this conversation going forward. I've had several requests from folks to have you both back. We will, as a board, talk about how we tackle this and what kind of conversations and formation and governance we want to put forward. But we'd love to invite you back to future meetings if you would be willing.
Most definitely.
Thank you very, very much. Really, really appreciate it. With that, we are going to say thank you to both. And I think everyone feels this way, right? Everyone is saying, and Christine has provided her details about the board she's involved with. We will address this issue again and probably many, many times to go forward. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our Honorable Vice Mayor, Stephen Glassman. And Steve, would you like to make comments about what we just talked about and then to address reopen phase 2 and anything else that you'd like to talk about? And in fairness for our time on the agenda, both Dan and Chief Kerr have offered to defer their time to talk about this important topic. Bless you both. Thank you very much. I will say this, if it's 5 minutes from both of you, would love to still hear from both of you, if you wouldn't mind. Let's see how long Vice Mayor speaks, and then if you are still willing to be here, we'd love to hear from both of you. You're both such central voices in our community, and particularly timely. I mean, all of it's so important, right? So with that, I turn it over to you, Vice Mayor Glassman.
Thank you, Colleen, and good evening, everybody. It's a great crowd tonight. I want to thank you for the work that you guys are doing every single day in your neighborhoods. Also, thank you, Chief Kerr, first responders. I've never had the pleasure of actually meeting Dr. Salters in Easton, so that was really, really very enlightening for me to listen to them. And I feel sort of like, wow, I'm going to talk about phase 2, how mundane after all of that. And that's kind of strange to just go from that to what I thought I would talk about. But it was so important to hear what they had to say. And I wish perhaps that might have even been the entire hour and a half, to be honest with you. But I will try to address some of the things that they said. Also, to make sure everyone understands that this is a really important time in our city's history. And I think that our commission understands the severity of it and understands how meaningful this is. I've actually participated in several different town halls, not just locally, but also statewide and nationally. There's an amazing discussion going on right now in our nation. And I can't remember anything quite like this unless I go back to probably a year when many of you were not even born, around in the mid-60s. So that to me is, this is just such an incredible, incredible time. And I really hope that the discussion eventually leads into real change. And I think that that's the direction we're going to see. I've had several conversations about this with Chris Lagerboom, our city manager. I think he's on now. And I know that our city commission began having a discussion at our last meeting, and I know that this will continue because it has to continue. And I want everyone to understand how much I do appreciate all of the peaceful protests that we've seen. You know, we've had about 5 or 6 different groups conducting protests now for the last several weeks in our city. Other than the incidents that we're all very aware of, those very unfortunate incidents, the conduct of the protesters has been really incredible. And it's been exactly what you would hope and you would expect. And the same thing for our first responders. Everyone's been really very, very much working together to make sure that the voices are heard, the protests are heard, that everyone's rights are protected in terms of speaking and protesting and a right to assemble. You know, it's interesting to me, I get comments sometimes made to me like, why are we letting these people in our city? Or why are we allowing, and I said, well, you know, because people have a right to assemble. They have a right to protest. That is about as American as you can get. So I'm always a little baffled when I get those questions and people feel that we're just opening our city to anyone that wants to come. But that's really not the case. And I think overall, the actions through the last several weeks have really been exemplary. And the ones that have not been, will be investigated. I know that I heard a little bit earlier people are saying, why haven't people been charged? You know, according to our state statutes, the officers, they do have a Bill of Rights. And so that's why the answer was correct. There is an ongoing investigation now. And we'll be discussing that at the commission as time goes on. But I just wanted you to know how much I really did enjoy listening to the gentleman, and I hope to someday actually meet them in person, and I'll look forward to when you have them back, Colleen, because I do want to hear more. I know you have a lot of folks on the agenda, so I'll get to something really quickly. I know on the agenda it says phase 2. Please know that we are not in phase 2 yet. We are in phase 1. Phase 2 is for most of the state except South Florida. But Broward County, Palm Beach County, Miami-Dade County are moving a little bit slower according to the governor's instructions. Although Palm Beach County has written to the governor and asked to enter into phase 2. As most of you know by now, and I still do find myself explaining this to a lot of people, the city of Fort Lauderdale is really not in charge of its own destiny when it comes to this pandemic. We can advocate, we can talk to our county commission, but because of the governor's emergency orders, it is our county administrator who basically holds all of the cards, not even the county commission, believe it or not. It is the county administrator who issues the emergency orders and dictates what phases we are in and what can open and when it can open. Now, you know that just yesterday, we did see a little bit more of a loosening in terms of youth activities and leagues and sports activities, and that happened as of yesterday. Now, this coming Monday, we will see more venues, movie theaters, bowling alleys at 50% capacity. That will come this coming Monday. After that, it's really anyone's guess when we're going to get into phase 2, because the county has been, and I think rightfully so, very much data driven. What are the numbers showing? And to be honest with you, the numbers have not been really that terrific. If you've been checking out the dashboard, I send out a constant contact email pretty much almost every day with as many updates as possible. In addition to what the city sends out, I try to send out more information. But I do have a little button there called the COVID-19 dashboard where you can get all of the latest numbers. And what we're always looking at are the number of cases, the percentage of positive cases of all of the cases, and then hospitalizations. And those are the things that we're focusing on. So if you don't get my constant contact email and you'd like to, please just contact my office and we'll be happy to add you to our distribution list, because we really do try to make sure that everyone has that latest information. Now, I will say that when we do enter phase 2, pretty much, and I've looked at what that means for the rest of the state, it's just a little bit more of a loosening up of businesses that can come back online. And then what it does for the businesses that are already online in our phase 1, it increases that percentage so that you would go from maybe a 50% capacity to a 75% capacity. And that seems to be the biggest difference as we'll enter into phase 2. And that's what I see right now on the horizon. We're always monitoring it. We're in close contact with our county commissioners. I speak to them very regularly, as I do with our state representatives, because so much of this is also coming from the governor's office. Again, I know that you have a really, really busy agenda, but if there's anything that I can help you with or answer, I didn't get a chance to look at the chat room, but I'm sure Keith will tell me if there's anything there. But that's pretty much it in general terms and in a nutshell of where we are right now. I have heard that things are going pretty well on the beach. The biggest complaints I get in terms of folks going to businesses like restaurants is that a lot of folks are not paying attention to wearing masks as they enter into an establishment up until the time that they're eating, or that people not wearing masks when they're inside in the places they should be. And even on the beach, by the way, the emergency order says that if you cannot maintain the social distance of 6 feet, you should be wearing a mask. So that's the biggest complaint that I received to date, is folks that are upset with others that don't seem to be adhering to the CDC guidelines and the emergency orders that have been issued in our county. But other than that, I have mostly been hearing very positive comments in terms of how the phase opening has been happening in our city, and people looking forward to the next step. I hear that the restaurants in Las Olas last weekend did really, really very well. And as you know, we're also working on other ways to let the businesses expand in our city, on Las Olas Boulevard, on 33rd up by the Gulf Ocean Mile. We're also looking at Sunrise Lane. Any area of the city that wants to expand the business footprint, they're coming to us, and we're trying to figure that out, how we do that and how we let them do that so that they can increase their capacity and at the same time maintain all of the social distancing requirements. So I think that we should be pleased with the way our reopening has happened. I think it's been a prudent reopening and one that makes sense. It's been data driven. And I think we are trying to find the balance as we go forward. That's about it from me, Colleen.
So, Vice Mayor, that's absolutely wonderful. And I know Dan has shared this as well. There's been an uptick in the cases. We are beholden to the county and the state in terms of response. But maybe, and Dr. Rader, I don't know if you would be willing perhaps to step in here. Interesting conversation with a woman visiting today from Cocoa Beach. We were laughing. She forgot her mask, came back into the grocery store, and we were laughing about it. And she shared that no one is wearing masks in Orlando, that you shouldn't be wearing a mask. It's unhealthy. You are inhaling carbon dioxide and retroviruses are entering your body. And I said, but I'm protected from you if you wear a mask. And she said that COVID is being motivated in the healthcare facilities because you get paid more to diagnose as a COVID case. She had it. It wasn't a big deal. So I think, there's fact and there's fiction and there's myth and there's reality. I told her, I know for a fact that this is serious, that there are cases and people are dying. Dr. JJ, could you clarify for people the need to act responsibly while out in public, and just reiterate for everyone here, maybe Cocoa Beach wants to act like that, but in Fort Lauderdale, we need to be very clear that this is real, it's still serious, and we need to stay safe.
Okay, so thank you. And thank you for having me on again. So the World Health Organization released information earlier this week. I don't remember if it was on Monday or Tuesday that they released, probably yesterday. So in the last 9 out of 10 days worldwide, there were over 100,000 new cases worldwide of COVID-19. This is not dying out. Past Sunday, over 136,000 new cases worldwide. That is the highest number of new cases in a single day since the onset of this outbreak. This is not over. Most of those cases were in the Americas and South Asia. So once again, we're not out of the woods yet. Vice Mayor Glassman can correct me if I'm wrong, but the Florida Department of Health in the last 30 days have noted a 91% uptick in the number of cases in Palm Beach, a 40% uptake in new cases in Miami-Dade, and a 34% uptake in new cases in Broward County. The difference between Miami-Dade, Broward County, and Palm Beach is Palm Beach does not mandate masks. That is a one big difference. So 90% versus 30 to 40%, I know what I would choose. I think the city leaders have done a stellar job and the county leaders have done a stellar job to keep people's head squarely on their shoulders. When we look more importantly at the death rate in Palm Beach has taken a 75% uptick in cases. Miami-Dade, 80% uptick, and Broward County, 48% uptick in death rates. In the people dying in the past 30 days. That is significant. That is not a laughing matter. When people refuse to wear a mask, we talk about personal freedoms, and we discussed that earlier. Once personal freedoms stop is where the other person's personal freedom starts. If they want to take a chance with their life, that is at their discretion. But I do not want them to take risks with my life, my parents' life, my family's life, my children's life. This is real. This is a danger we're going to be dealing with for a very, very long time to come. when I saw the protests, one of the things that had me concerned was the fact that many people were not wearing a mask and they were screaming and yelling. We know during a situation like that, the virus actually can bridge much more than 6 feet. There's no social distancing. And once again, as a healthcare provider, I look at the same thing with a completely different set of eyes. And my concern is that there might be an uptick related to that nationwide also. We need to do this. We need to do this carefully. Shutting down the country like we did before, I think that was a one-time deal. It ain't going to happen again. We were able to bring the numbers down dramatically. And I think our city leaders, our county leaders need to continue the diligent effort they have put in to keep us all safe. Because sometimes they need to keep us safe against our own wishes and desires. Because I agree with Vice Mayor Glassman. When I drove up Las Olas going from one hospital to another, I was seeing workers at some restaurants. I'm not going to name names. They were not open yet, but they were setting the tables, putting the dishes, the plates, the silverware on the table, not wearing a mask. The point of the case is, if they are infected, they now have infected the dishes, they have infected everything else, and the patrons who are going to come in a few hours later are now subjected to that risk. People don't understand this. This is novel. As a healthcare provider, we are struggling to understand this. I can only imagine what a layperson with no training in this arena would face. I frequently see people wearing a mask like this, where the nose is outside of the mask. And I look at them, I'm like, why bother? And sometimes I'm in a store and I'm educating people, you know what, cover your face. And they're like, it's uncomfortable. I know it is. As far as health issues, there have been reports by a large number of healthcare providers, upward of 50%, that they are developing headaches from wearing a mask. That is because the CO2 is indeed rising, but that is because we're wearing them 10 to 12 hours in a row. Most individual people, that will not be the case. When you go to a store, you're gonna wear the mask, you leave the store, you go to your car, you take it off. So I think, you know, yes, there is definitely a concern about that. It's not comfortable. The other message I want people to remember, when you put on a mask and remove a mask, do not touch the front of the mask. Hold it by the straps. Why? Because now you're infecting the front of the mask and you're going to be inhaling the area that is infected. Once again, you know, I had a discussion with some people from City Council, from the City Commission, and telling them I think it's time, either for Broward County, even for the state, to do public service announcements, teaching people how to handle putting on a mask, how to handle taking it off, what can you do to sanitize it properly, when should you not wear a mask. If you're jogging down the street and there is nobody around next to you or on the beach, you don't need to wear a mask. Have a mask available so that you can put it on rapidly if you need to. But there is misperception, misunderstandings. And I think, you know, we're going to be in this foreseeably for the next year. So I think it's very, very important for people to understand, because my biggest fear is that people are going to throw their hands up in the air and say, I'm done with it. And that's bad.
That's wonderful, Dr. Rader. Really, really appreciate you being on these calls. Thank you so much. I will say this. I do think that the other link, and maybe this is obvious to everyone else, but I think it's an important point to make. Wearing masks also helps our economy get started. If people are paying attention to sanitation and cleaning guidelines and wearing masks, I mean, we will get back started. And Dan, I don't know if I can call on you perhaps just to talk about, I know there are recovery marketing plans underway, Lauderdale and I Love Local 2020 and a number of other, you know, kind of campaigns. Are any of these marketing campaigns including specifics about, you know, wearing masks and that sort of thing? Shouldn't that be part of it? Because I think if people are not safe, they're going to get infected. It's going to get worse. Cases will go up. What are your thoughts, both on the status of business recovery? And I realize, Chief Kerr, I'm jumping right over you. Let me give Dan 5 minutes and then come back to you. Maybe Dan wants more than 5 minutes. And by the way, Vice Mayor Glassman, I neglected to thank you. Thank you, as always, for your wonderful input, commentary, and perspective across the board. Appreciate it. Dan, I defer to you.
Vice Mayor, great to see you. Colleen, thank you. And Chief, I hope to hear you too, because I want to hear what you're going to say. And Greg, it's so great to see you again. And great words, Easton, great words. Everybody, I'm Dan Lindblade. I'm the president and CEO of the Greater Fort Lauderdale Chamber of Commerce. Yes, Colleen, we are incorporating somewhat in some of the campaigns that are going to be rolling out this month. Lauderdale's, what Colleen was referring to, is our annual kind of throw to all of our community to get them to go to local restaurants. So you can get a dinner for two for a 3-course meal for like 30, 35, 36 bucks for those groups that sign up. So you can see that all at the CVB website, the Convention and Visitors Bureau. They're not, I haven't seen them incorporating it into the campaign much, but the other campaign that's going to kick off countywide on the 15th, the week of the 15th, is called a Supporter of Broward campaign, confidentially. I'm not supposed to let anybody know that. I'm not quite sure why we're keeping it a secret, but we're keeping it a secret. And so I'm an SOB. You're an SOB. We're all a supporter of Broward. So it's think eat like an SOB, dine like an SOB. On the back of your car, you can put a bumper sticker on your car, say SOB on board. And so we want everybody to really participate. It's going to be a billboard campaign. It's a little edgy, I get it. I didn't really like it at first because I thought it was insulting, but the more I've accepted it, the more. So wear your mask like an SOB. That's where they're kind of including, because someone brought that up, Colleen. So, I mean, I'm happy to go into other stuff too. We are well on our way into recovery. You saw the latest national employment statistics that came out. So obviously people are being rehired, coming back. We had in April about 136,000 people in
Tells me I'm
Broward.
first, and then she.
You're not on mute, Vice Mayor. There you go. So 136,000 people in April, 14.5% unemployment. It's the highest it's been since I've been president of the chamber for 13 years. But the good news is, if there is good news on this, and I kind of like to look at it at the good side of it, is all of our economic indicators prior to going into COVID, prior to going into the murder of George Floyd, were very positive. So there was nothing wrong with the economy. This is a healthcare issue. This is a social injustice issue. And so we can work on those, but all the economic indicators were all positive. So I think we'll recover. It's going to take some businesses longer, hospitality, maybe twice as long as others, because people have to feel safe to go out. Our polling on going out says that some people don't want to go out until there's a vaccine. We won't have a vaccine until sometime mid next year, maybe. And other people don't want to go out until they feel safe. So we're going to work on all that. That's what the campaign's all about. And lots of good stuff going on out there. We've lost some businesses though, Colleen. We've lost some businesses. We've lost restaurants. Those will never come back. So that's the negative side of it. You just can't be open or not open for 3 months and expect to start back up again as a small business entrepreneur. It just doesn't happen. You got rents to pay and all of that. So, but we're optimistic. I see good things starting to happen, and we're going to work on this inequality issue. We've been talking and working on it, so we build it in part of our DNA. We think we can make a difference as the business community in this arena. And so we're going to take that up like we did with Stoneman Douglas on that massacre. It wasn't a typical issue for us to deal with, but we will deal with this and we will help. We will find our voice and our lane and participate to the full extent we can. Thanks.
Thank you, Dan. That was absolutely wonderful. Really, really wonderful. Are there any silver linings on the business side of the house? In other words, we see industry sectors being impacted and unemployment very high for the sectors we know are risky, proximate and dense kind of, areas. But are there any silver linings in terms of new businesses or new industry sectors that are bubbling up? Do you see that happening? I guess we'll keep our eye on it, but.
The big thing, and Mike Jackson, who's the chairman of the board and CEO of AutoNation, said this in in a meeting that I was in with him, and he said, man, if you haven't invested in IT as a business owner and you haven't figured out that you need to be out there with IT and so that you can work from home and you can work all these different angles, then you're way behind. And so that was a big learning curve for me.
Yep, that makes sense. That makes sense. Well, and thank you for the acknowledgement of equity being central and not kind of the underlying priority, but the overarching one, right? For all of us going forward. So Dan is a wonderful leader in our community, and as he mentioned, he's the Greater Fort Lauderdale Chamber of Commerce president and CEO. But he's got his he's got the pulse of the business community, and has been at this and part of our collective community for many, many years. And Dan, I would just respectfully, humbly ask if you would be willing to come back on occasion as well. We'd love to hear from you again.
Anytime. I see a lot of people I know on this call, so I'm always here and ready, willing, and able.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. All right, so Chief Kerr, are you still with us?
I am here.
So I just want to introduce Chief Kerr. For those of you that don't know, and I guess I would like to just acknowledge this because I am also a woman. She is the first ever female fire chief for the city of Fort Lauderdale. She comes from Austin. She's a 4th generation firefighter. She started her career here and has come back. She was an interim assistant city manager during the transition period for the city of Fort Lauderdale. She's also just a trailblazer in the profession itself. She was the first woman elected president of the International Association of Fire Chiefs in the 142-year history of that organization. The president of the Metropolitan Fire Chiefs Association, and many other distinctions. Holds a master's of NPA and a Bachelor of Arts degree. And she's earned 2 certifications from Harvard's program for senior executives. So really privileged to have you in service for our city, and really grateful for you for being patient and sticking around to briefly talk to us. And we will follow up with material and guidelines, but especially the pandemic, what are you seeing? How are you handling this? Any specific advice for residents you want to offer here tonight? Thank you.
Yeah, so thanks. I'm going to be really quick because I see that my city manager is on, and I know he's on the agenda as well. So I don't want to shortchange him. You know, he is my boss and he is in charge of the budget. So I'm going to do my best. But, you know, that pink fire truck behind me is just a symbol really of who the fire department is. And when I had that wrapped, I thought, oh my gosh, I wonder what the men are going to think about this. And they absolutely love being in that truck. They just say people make them pull over. They want to take pictures. But the part of it is it's so important is it's really a symbol. And it's a symbol for those firefighters that have lost the battle to cancer. It's a symbol for those that have beat cancer. And I myself am a breast cancer survivor. So it's even more exciting in that regard. But in regard to the pandemic, and I know we talked a little bit about hurricane, and there really isn't that much that's different for the citizens in regard to hurricane preparedness as there is during a regular hurricane as it is during the pandemic. The one thing that I would suggest is that you probably try to start to acquire your supplies a little bit earlier than when the announcement that the cone is being forecast. So yes, we all know during the pandemic and during the COVID that, you know, certain things are really difficult to get. So instead of going and hoarding lots of things, each time you go to the store, gather up some, you know, non-perishable supplies, get your water, get some of those things, make sure you have your medications. The things that you need are certainly going to be a battery-powered lantern, battery-powered radio, those type of things, extra batteries, a first aid kit, cash, and important documents are things that sometimes people forget about. But if we have a storm and we have no power, you're not going to be able to get cash out of the ATM machine. So it's important, and they won't be able to run your credit cards either. So it will be important that you do have some cash, you know, for a few days. the FEMA is suggesting that everybody, if you are not in evacuation zone, to do everything you can to shelter in place. And if you can't shelter in place, then try to find a family, friend, or a hotel out of the evacuation zone where you can stay. The last resort is that you want to use a shelter. As you well know, as we heard, there's about 6 foot distancing, social distancing, wearing masks, which I totally support. And I think it's that type of policy that of 500 members of between ocean rescue and fire, that we've only had 1 positive COVID firefighter. So I think it's all the policies and wearing masks and doing all the right things that have kept the number of COVID positive cases down amongst the members that are responding to and interacting with those patients. So, and then if you are going to go to a shelter during the COVID pandemic, then remember to bring certain other things, the same things that you're doing at home. Hand sanitizer, make sure you have at least 2 masks per person. And again, some cleaning supplies, wipes and those type of things. And obviously the stuff that you would normally bring, well, I don't know if you know what that would be, but you would bring bedding, your toiletries, food, snacks, water, those type of things. But the things that are different really are very few. And I want to leave with, I'm very passionate about racial equity and also just equity, having been discriminated against as a woman in my field. But that favorite saying from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., he says that our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. And I think a lot of that discussion today was just about that. So, and I really appreciated being able to sit in and listen. So thank you very much.
Oh, Chief Kerr, that was absolutely wonderful. And I also just want to acknowledge, we are joined by Chief Maglione as well. So Chief, I can't see you, but I see your name. So just want to say hello to you. Chief Kerr, you're wonderful. We will definitely have you back as well if you are willing.
Absolutely.
Thank you. And we all want to ride on that truck in October. So, Chris, so for the last several months, we have rounded up the council meetings by hearing from our city manager. The first month or so, we sent him a long list of questions, and he, had answers for each of our questions. The last few months since the pandemic, he has graciously graced our doorway to kind of culminate and provide kind of the overarching view and perspective of what's going on in the city. So we're very, very grateful. Chris, you're always so patient and also always so willing and available to come speak to us. So thank you very, very much. I will turn it over to you, and I will tell you the only kind of broad questions that were as of last month that we didn't get to were, and I think you did talk about this briefly last month, the park and police bond, the federal courthouse locations we didn't get to, and the reconvening of city volunteer boards. Those were the only 3 topics that we had outstanding from last month, but I will turn it to you to kind of talk about just top of mind what the current priorities are for you and going forward. So thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Colleen, and good evening, everybody. It's a privilege to be with everybody. So I certainly don't mind, and it's a doorstep that I'm thrilled to be at, and just thankful that you continue to invite me to that doorstep. So I can touch on a couple of those topics, but recognizing the hour and recognizing the importance of what's happened in the last week, I think that it would be disingenuous of me to talk about federal courthouses and not address what we're dealing with currently. So I do want to talk quickly on those topics, and then I'll talk about some current topics. You see the caliber of the public servant I get to serve with. Dr. Salter is a tremendous asset in our police department. He and I have done work together in advancing some leadership issues in Broward County. There's nobody better in front of a crowd, I'll say that. Right off the bat, he is entertaining, but he's impactful, and I think you saw that tonight. So you have certainly had the benefit of one of our superstars, both on and off the stage. And so I've spent some time with him in the last couple of weekends in our real-time crime center, and just continue to learn from him as he helps lead our police department. So thank you to him. Thank you also to Chief Kerr for all of the reasons that were talked about. She truly is a superstar in firefighting and has broken so many glass ceilings along the way that it's a privilege to serve with her too. So that's a caliber of some of the people that I get to serve with, and I just want to acknowledge that they're here. Talking quickly about the federal courthouse, just to get it out of the way and to check that box. They were looking at 4 different sites. I think they're down to 2 now. There's a site that they're looking at that's adjacent to the county courthouse building, and one that they're looking at on South Andrews Avenue. We'll see where they go with that. It changes. It seems to change quite frequently. The city took a position and suggested that of the 4 sites, they look at 2 and not look at the other 2. They're in receipt of that information, and we haven't had any follow-up since then. The federal government works so slow that it literally will be years before we get to where they even have a land deal done in any of those or in that project. With respect to the police building bond and the Parks and Recreation bond, going back to March of last year, those were both voter-initiated bonds, which means we went in referendum to the voters, and the voters voted for those projects to happen. We're probably further ahead in the parks than we are in the police building, but both are moving ahead. And we just approved at the last commission meeting some playgrounds for a couple of parks, as well as some land acquisition to acquire land. And there's some really targeted land acquisition that's happening around town to either enhance the parks that we have and make them bigger, or to find park space in areas that is otherwise lacking. So we do now have a program manager on board. That was a critical first step. They will meet with the district commissioners as well as our staff and start those projects that were highlighted district by district, and we'll start there as well as push across the finish line any projects that are already in progress. So I'll look to see that work take life. Let me touch on maybe what's more important to our community and our city and to me. And that is the events of the last couple of weeks as it relates to our response and our police interaction at some planned protests in downtown Fort Lauderdale. We all see videos, and I can tell you I was just as unhappy in seeing the videos that we all saw come across our cell phones or computers as to our officers' interaction with the protesters and the public. I can tell you that as an organization, we're committed to a policy that leads us to the truth. And we're committed to finding that truth no matter what that truth is, whether we like it or we don't. And I can tell you that we were fast to action. We were quick to remove officers from any further contact with the public. And we're notified by the state attorney of their intent to investigate prior to our administrative investigation. That doesn't mean that we won't look at the cases at some point, that we won't look at whether or not we acted appropriately or inappropriately, but that we'll let them take the lead, because if they want to look at it from a criminal perspective, that always goes first, and that goes first before any administrative investigation. What I can tell you, and I've felt this over a whole career, is that there is no bigger enemy of a bad police officer than a good one. And we have a tremendous amount of good ones in our law enforcement organization, one of which spoke to you tonight, and he's partnered by colleagues both above him and below his rank that are committed to protecting the safety of Fort Lauderdale. So I don't want us to lose sight of the fact that there's a lot of people that come in and make sure that we're safe and have the ability to even conduct a meeting like this on a daily basis. Yes, is there change needed? Absolutely. Is the dialogue need to continue? No doubt. Have we looked at the 8 Can't Wait and the Obama Pledge and looked at our police policies in response to these uses of force? That is ongoing. And as recent as today, I asked Chief Maglione to look into a mandatory intervention policy, where if an officer sees something that is improper or not correct, that we have a policy that says that they have to intervene. And we saw that happen 2 Sundays ago with Officer Crystal Smith, who was quick to intervene. The actions that she took that day were exactly the actions that needed to take place in that circumstance. And the fact that she had the guts and the courage to do it is a testament to her character as now one of our Fort Lauderdale police officers. So I can tell you that as a city, We are not looking to skirt any of the issues. We're ready to talk about the issues. We're ready to find the truth. And we've got 2 events right now that we're trying to find the truth in. One, we have somebody who has willingly come to us and talked to us about it. The other has not. There is media circulating, the TV news reports, as well as newspaper articles that show somebody who was struck in the face with one of our less than lethal impact weapons. She has not come to talk to us yet. And so we are getting our information through the media, and we have enough that we are going to start our own investigation even without a statement. It's just that important to us that we figure out what the truth in that circumstance was too. So I'll leave you with the fact that we recognize that this is a great dialogue that has started. We are not going to walk away from it as an organization. In fact, on a chat, I told Dr. Salters, I said, I want to talk to him after the fact, because hearing him talk about the topic, I think he can be a large part of how we continue our dialogue as a city. And I think it's important that we not lose sight of the fact that we have changed, much needed change that's needed. And I look forward to continuing to be a part of an organization that recognizes people for their strengths and abilities, and not anything but that. Having said that, let me also talk about our response to COVID-19. We still, as an organization, are planning for a reopening. We heard generously from the doctors tonight that the numbers don't look like they're going the right direction. I can tell you we have a strict enforcement policy on facial coverings in any of our city facilities. And as we start to open up programs, we put together a return to work task force that's looking at all of those different required measures across not only our buildings, but as youth programs and summer camps are allowed to come back open, that we put a degree of protection in those openings as well. So time will tell when we go into phase 2, as the vice mayor indicated. That is a decision right now of the county. The county mayor, the county administrator has to make essentially an application to the governor's office to move Broward County into phase 2. I know Bertha Henry has issued a new executive order that goes into effect on Monday and will allow other things to start to open back up in the form of summer camps, youth recreation. Bowling alleys of all things. So if you've missed out on your bowling, that'll be an opportunity again starting on Monday. But we too want to make sure that we open up in a way that we come back, that the economy comes back, that we come back as a city, but that we do so safely and so that we don't end up with more people sick. I planned on coming tonight to talk about where we were with the census and the budget and all those good things. I'll tell you, the city continues to move forward, even in times like this where we have other things that take the spotlight that we need to react to and talk about and address. We will be talking tomorrow with the Budget Advisory Board as a city staff on a 2021 budget. I can tell you that I will be proposing to the commission as early as tomorrow morning in a commission memorandum, a 2021 budget that is balanced and that recommends that the millage rate yet again remain at the 4.1193 millage rate that's been held for the last 14 years. It's a budget that completely eliminates the return on investment from the utility that we've talked about, as well as provide for essential city services. It was a tough one to put together because obviously we're in a time of revenue decline, and often when revenues decline, expenses also try to increase. We really had to block against that this year and say, if we're looking at a revenue decline, then we need to figure out where we can do some creative reductions, strategic reductions, probably a better word than creative, so that I can present to the commission a budget that's balanced that I think will serve our needs. Of course, I probably didn't get it all right. You typically don't. Sometimes you put stuff in that they didn't want in, and sometimes you leave stuff out that they want. And I'm mindful of that policy process and look forward to those discussions with them over the next couple of months so that we position ourselves into the future. If we were to go with what is being presented, again, it will likely be tweaked some. I'm fairly happy that we're able to present a budget that does not call for a millage rate increase, does not dip into our city's reserves, and does all the other things that I think the policy setters wanted by way of reducing other transfers from one fund into another. So as you all know, I can talk all night. I've been known to do that, and now I see that I'm 10 minutes past the 8 o'clock time for ending your meeting. Let me go back to the most important thing that we're dealing with as a city right now, and that's our dialogue around inclusion and being equal and making sure that we don't lose sight of this terrible event that happened in Minneapolis. That it is as unfortunate as it is that there's something that is learned from it, and that we make changes because of it, and are not resistant to maintain the status quo. So I don't have all the perfect answers, and I don't know that any of us do, but we all have answers, and we're all part of that discussion. And when we put all of us as a part of that discussion, we probably can put together a really good outcome. So with that, know that your city is committed to process, committed to finding the truth, and I'll deal with whatever the truth is, whether I like it or not. So just know that we're committed to that. Thank you, Colleen.
Thank you, Chris. Absolutely wonderful. If you're ready in time for the August meeting, we'd love to talk to you about the budget. I don't know how far along the cycle, but that would be great. And I don't want to speak on behalf of the board or the council membership, but I do think that equity, and specifically racial equity, right?
Agreed.
Be kind of a central topic for us on a regular basis, and maybe even every meeting. I think we're at that point. It is time to stand up and do more, and do it consistently with continuity. So thank you very, very much. With that, just an amazing group of people that came together tonight, and leaders who spoke from the heart, authentically, and really substantively. So deeply grateful for all who attended the call, but also our wonderful speakers. We as a council do have some business to get to. We have a little treasurer's report and meeting minutes we need to vote on, but anyone that would like to stay on, you are more than welcome. Otherwise, you can drop off, and we will revert to our council business, and look forward to seeing all of you, most of you, more of you next time. And our next meeting is in August. So thank you to all. Have a good night. And special thanks to our equity speakers, Dr. Salters and Easton Harrison. But all of you have been amazing tonight. Thank you. So Keith,
thank you very much, everybody. Stay safe and be well. Good night.
Thank you, Keith.
Thank you.
Keith, if I could have you put up the agenda, if you don't mind, and we might just go straight to the treasurer's report, because I think that is next. Oh, I apologize. Chris mentioned this already, but the census reminder, we have some more time, but the last we checked, Fort Lauderdale completion rates were less than 50%. I think folks are fully aware that census completion is tied to our future well-being and the services and revenue that are delivered for our economy locally. So it is as close to an imperative as it can be. The city is doing a lot of work with walkabout. We're 51% according to Kelly, thank you. But for neighborhoods that have not completed their census, please, please, please go out to your neighborhoods, make sure your members know the essential nature of this to be counted. Also, the council renews every year around this time. Just a soft reminder to neighborhoods, given the context, this is a soft reminder for those that have not renewed their membership to please do so. And then with that, we can go to the treasurer's report. And Melinda, I'll turn it over to you. And Keith, I can unmute her if you are.
Oh, I unmuted myself. So okay. One step ahead of you, Keith. So thank you so much, Colleen. I'll do this briefly. Members, the last time I spoke to you was in May, on May 12. At the moment here today on June 9, we've got a total in all accounts of $11,665. That's between our SunTrust primary checking account and our PayPal account there. You can see them on the screen. I did do the treasurer's report does include a detailed membership payment summary with all relevant dates going back to early 2020. And I do want to let you all know that since I spoke to you in May, we have had 5 voting member associations renew their membership. Just a reminder, it's only $50 annually. And we've had 1 non-voting member renew, and that was the Central City Alliance. Thank you for that. That's annual dues of $100. And as far as expenses, I'll just let you know that we just had 1 reimbursement of food expenses that for food in March. It was a small amount, around $50. And that is all I have. I'll take any questions or comments.
That's great. Any questions from anyone? Otherwise, we'll accept the treasurer's report and move on. And I also forgot, for anyone that joined the call late and did not write your name and neighborhood in the chat box, please do so now so that we have an accurate roll call. And if we could just do a roll call now of the board members by voice. I think everyone's unmuted. So I will name you because I think I know folks who are here, but why don't we go around and each of you say hello. Michael Albetta.
Good evening.
Melinda Bowker has just spoken. Luis Castillo. I saw him before. Jim Concanon is also here. I saw him. Kathy Stubbs. I saw her. You guys can unmute yourself and speak, you know. Dennis Ulmer, did I call you yet? And Kelly Manning, I believe you.
Hello, everybody.
Okay. All right. So.
Okay, I'm here too.
Okay, wonderful. And Christina Curry spoke earlier, so we know. So we have the entire board, so we can vote as well on the next item, the only item that we're voting on, which is the review and acceptance of the prior meeting month's minutes from May 12th. Any edits or suggested edits for the meeting minutes? Okay.
I make a motion to approve the May 12th general meeting minutes, please.
Thank you.
And I second.
I think that was Louise seconding. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, so meeting minutes are approved. Thank you very much. With that, last item is just that every summer we usually take a break, right? So this summer we're also taking a break. There will be no board meeting in June. Our next board meeting is in July. There is no general meeting in July. The next general meeting is August 11th. I will also mention that Dr. Getz has offered, as he is a medical doctor, and I think the only neighborhood leader that is a qualified physician, has offered his availability for questions, and he also has a lot of great medical material and research.
Want to go outside?
So Dr. Getz has put his email in the chat box, and we will also share that out with everyone for anyone who would like to check with him. With that, if barring any other comments or input,
Don't our treasurer's report need to be approved?
No.
Thank you.
Yeah, Kelly, I did that one too many times, and Michael reminded me several times we don't have to vote on the treasurer's report. So yeah, it was accepted, which is, I guess.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments from the board or otherwise before we close out? Okay. All right. Thank you all very much. Look forward to seeing you in August. Be safe, wear masks, and look forward to another wonderful discussion the next time we get together. With that.
Motion to adjourn.
Okay.
Second. Fabulous meeting. Excellent job, Colleen. Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Great job, Colleen, and thank you to the guests. Fantastic
everybody.
meeting.
Excellent meeting.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good night, everybody. Be safe.
All right.
Good night.